single dad CEO hired a fake date for the party, but his little girl asked, "Can she stay forever?" David Carter stood before his mirror, carefully adjusting the final button of his tuxedo. His cufflinks gleamed under the soft light, yet his gaze remained distant and unreadable, a mask worn by a man long accustomed to concealing his profound weariness. His eyes lingered on a framed photograph on the side table, his late wife Lily smiling as she cradled baby Ava. He let out a slow, deliberate breath, a habit etched into him by grief. A sudden knock at the door broke the heavy silence. "Mr. Carter," Maria's voice called from outside. "The Tokyo team just arrived. They're expecting your guest." David glanced at his watch. "She's just someone I hired from an app," he replied. "She'll be here." He didn't even know her real name, only Zoe. She was highly rated, professional, and discreet, everything he needed for the evening. Tonight she would be a partner on paper, a perfectly placed illusion. Meanwhile, in a small dressing room, Zoe adjusted the sleeves of her navy gown, her golden hair elegantly curled around her shoulders. Her face was calm, though clearly guarded. She had played this role countless times before, fitting perfectly into the expected mold. Yet tonight felt subtly different. "Just another role," she whispered to herself. "Get in. Smile. Get out." By the time she stepped into the Carter Foundation Gala, the ballroom was already a vibrant hum of activity. Music drifted through the air. Champagne flutes sparkled and chandeliers illuminated the polished marble floor, making it gleam like liquid gold. David stood among various executives, cool and composed, but the moment his gaze found Zoe, something within him momentarily paused. She moved with an innate grace, both elegant and grounded, and while her smile was gentle, her eyes held a captivating depth. "David Carter," she asked, her voice steady and calm. "Yes," he replied, slightly taken aback. "Zoe." "That's me," she confirmed effortlessly, slipping her arm into his as if it were the most natural fit in the world. Before David could speak again, a small voice joyfully cried, "Daddy!" Ava came rushing in a flurry of pink tulle with her curls bouncing. Instead of running directly to David, she stopped right in front of Zoe. Zoe instinctively knelt down, her expression warm. "Hi there," she greeted the little girl. Ava gazed at her with wide, innocent eyes, then trustingly took Zoe's hand. "Can she stay forever?" she asked, her voice a sweet plea. Laughter rippled through the surrounding crowd. The previously stiff executives visibly relaxed their faces, melting into genuine smiles. David blinked in surprise. "She usually doesn't warm up to people this fast," he mused. Zoe gently held Ava, a soft thought crossing her mind. Perhaps the child recognized something familiar in her. With Ava now comfortably nestled on her hip, Zoe gracefully turned towards the group of executives. "You must be Mr. Nakamura," she said with a welcoming smile. "David has told me so much about your vision for sustainable AI." Nakamura, clearly impressed, raised an eyebrow. "And I am Zoe, just Zoe," she clarified. "I work in community development, but I've always admired the intersection of technology and impact." From that instant, the entire atmosphere of the gathering shifted palpably. They were no longer simply conversing with a CEO. They were engaging with what felt like a family. Zoe moved through the conversations with thoughtful composure, always genuine and never overreaching. She gently guided Ava whenever the child interrupted, subtly transforming every compliment into a moment of shared warmth. When one partner commented on the exquisite beauty of the venue, Zoe smiled and added, "David wanted it to reflect the best of both cultures. He worked hard on every single detail." David observed her in silence. She wasn't merely pretending, she was truly connecting with everyone. A Tokyo executive leaned in and quietly whispered to David, "She's wonderful, so warm. You're a lucky man." David opened his mouth, intending to correct him, but then paused. He looked at Zoe holding Ava, both laughing softly, her eyes glowing with undeniable sincerity. He closed his mouth, a quiet smile spreading across his face. The evening after the gala, David stood at the front door of his modern townhouse, waiting as Zoe emerged from a black car. The soft porch light cast a warm glow across her face, tempering the cool night air. She seemed hesitant, yet composed. "I figured," David said, holding the door open. "Since we made quite the impression last night, we might as well finish the role with dinner." Zoe offered a faint smile as she stepped inside. "Of course, for consistency," he added with a nod. But the truth was far simpler. He just didn't want the night to end without seeing her again. The house was undeniably elegant, sleek, and profoundly quiet. Perhaps too quiet. Its tastefully decorated walls carried a certain emptiness, a detail Zoe noticed immediately. It was the kind of pervasive silence that settles in a home when joy has been absent for far too long. Suddenly Ava came running from the hallway, dressed in a fuzzy unicorn pajama set, her eyes lighting up at the sight of Zoe. "Mommy Z!" she squealed with delight, launching herself into Zoe's waiting arms. Zoe instinctively knelt, embracing the child who clung to her as if they'd been separated for days, not mere hours. "Mommy Z!" David repeated, his eyebrows raising in surprise. Ava turned, grinning proudly. "That's her name now? She's in our pretend family. I'm the baby. Daddy is the daddy and she's the mommy." David blinked, a slight smile playing on his lips. "Is that so?" Zoe laughed softly, unsure whether to feel flattered or a little awkward. "Well, I suppose I've been promoted," she quipped. Ava, brimming with determined energy, tugged Zoe towards the living room. "We're playing now. You sit here, Mommy Z. Daddy, you go to work. You say goodbye." David exchanged a quick, amused glance with Zoe, then shrugged and played along. "Goodbye, sweetheart," he said, leaning down to kiss Ava's head. Ava then pointed at Zoe. "Kiss her too. That's what daddies do." Zoe flushed crimson, and David froze, caught off guard. "Just pretend." Ava insisted, her tone utterly serious. After a long suspended pause, David bent slightly and placed a gentle, polite kiss on Zoe's cheek. She barely managed a smile. Something subtle shifted in the air between them. It wasn't awkward or forced, merely still. As Ava meticulously arranged teacups and plush animals for a make-believe dinner, Zoe watched her intently. The child was radiant and happy, yet Zoe perceived something deeper, an unspoken vulnerability. How fiercely Ava clung to this fleeting version of a family, even if it was only a game of make-believe. Later, after Ava had been tucked into bed with her favorite stuffed bunny, Zoe drifted into the kitchen while David prepared tea. The gentle clink of a spoon against the porcelain cup softly punctuated the silence. Her gaze swept over the room, noting its clean, minimalist aesthetic, much like the rest of the house. Yet one small detail drew her attention, a silver picture frame resting subtly beside the fruit bowl. She moved closer, curiosity piqued. It was a photograph David holding a tiny baby wrapped in a hospital blanket. Beside him, a woman with auburn hair and soft eyes smiled gently, her features tired but undeniably radiant. Zoe recognized that profound light in her expression. "Lily." David's voice came from behind her, softer than it had been all evening as Zoe turned. "She passed away when Ava was 3 months old." He continued, his voice steady yet distant. "It was cancer, quick, unforgiving." "I'm so sorry," Zoe whispered, her voice filled with genuine empathy. David nodded once, accepting her condolence. "Thank you." The moment stretched between them, fragile and respectful, brimming with a quiet, shared understanding. Zoe gently returned the photograph to its place. "She looks kind," she observed softly. "She was," David replied, his gaze still on the picture. "She would have liked you." Zoe smiled, genuinely touched by his words. "Even if I'm just the pretend version?" she asked lightly. He looked at her for a long moment, his gaze now notably softer. "Sometimes," he said, his voice a low confession, "pretend is the only thing that feels real." Zoe swallowed the lump that had risen in her throat. She was accustomed to playing roles, to the act of pretending, but this house, this child, this man, they weren't a script. They were living, breathing memories woven together with grief and love and something nascent beginning to bloom. As she sipped the tea, he handed her their fingers, brushed briefly once more. Neither of them pulled away. The night air was still enfolding them in a quiet that felt like a comforting heavy blanket. From an open window, soft ballet music drifted Ava's favorite lullaby, the one she insisted helped her dream of twirling. Zoe sat alone in the backyard, curled on a wooden bench, a warm cup of tea in her hands. The air was crisp, carrying the subtle scent of lavender from the garden. She wore one of David's oversized flannel shirts paired with leggings, looking as though she belonged. Yet inside, she felt profoundly like a guest in someone else's life. As the music swelled to a familiar crescendo, her gaze remained fixed on the grass, but her mind journeyed far away. She was 17 again backstage, her blonde hair meticulously pinned beneath a tiara, too pristine. She recalled the hushed anticipation of the audience, the distinct smell of rosin, the subtle vibration of the stage beneath her feet, all so vividly real. She stepped into the spotlight for one perfect moment. Then came the landing, one wrong step, a sharp crack, followed by an immediate terrifying silence. The doctors later told her she was fortunate to walk again, but the dream, that beautiful, agonizing dream, had vanished forever. Zoe blinked, snapping back to the present, her hands trembling around the teacup. The music clicked off, and the subsequent silence felt even louder. She hugged her knees, allowing the raw memory to settle within her. Then the screen door creaked open, and David's soft footsteps approached. "You okay?" he asked gently, his voice laced with concern. She nodded slowly. "Just thinking." David paused. "You looked like you were somewhere far away." She hesitated, then spoke, her eyes not quite meeting his. "I used to dance ballet for most of my life." He listened intently, offering no interruption. "I had a spot lined up in Paris at the Opéra Garnier. My instructor said I was born for it." She managed a faint, bittersweet smile. "Then I wasn't." He frowned slightly, sensing the pain in her words. "I fell during rehearsal, resulting in a fractured spine and extensive rehabilitation. Point work was forever out of the question." David's expression shifted, recognizing the gravity of her revelation. "You were a professional dancer." "Almost," she corrected softly, "close enough to feel it, then lose it entirely." A quiet silence settled between them. David then stepped behind her and gently draped a soft shawl around her shoulders, the same one she had used to cover Ava earlier that day. His hands lingered for a moment, not intrusively, but just long enough for their warmth to be felt. "I know what it's like," he said quietly, his voice resonating with shared understanding. "To lose the thing you built your entire life around and wake up with absolutely nothing." Zoe looked up at him, her vulnerability exposed. "How do you live with it?" He sat down beside her, not too close yet, close enough to share the cool night air. "You don't. Not at first," he admitted. "You keep moving for someone else. For Ava, in my case. She kept me standing when I couldn't do it for myself." Zoe looked down at the shawl wrapped around her, her heart feeling both exposed and strangely safe. "I teach sometimes," she confessed. "Little girls, nothing formal, just enough to feel the rhythm again." David smiled warmly. "I think Ava would love that." "She already does," Zoe whispered, a soft secret. "She just doesn't know it yet." He chuckled softly, and the silence returned, no longer heavy, but healing. They sat beneath the stars, two people once broken, now finding something profoundly real in the stillness. They were no longer strangers, but something infinitely closer. It began with a soft whisper and a gentle tug on her sleeve. One morning, as sunlight streamed into the living room, Ava tiptoed up to Zoe, who was seated on the floor, helping her stack building blocks. Ava's eyes were wide and hopeful, as if she were asking for something sacred. "Can you teach me how to dance?" she asked in a small voice. Zoe blinked, surprised. "Dance?" Ava nodded eagerly, then pointed to the speaker on the shelf. "I saw a video of a girl twirling like a fairy. Mommy used to do that. Daddy says I'm not old enough, but I want to be a fairy too. It was the first time Ava had mentioned her mother without any prompting. Zoe gently brushed a stray curl from the child's cheek. "I can show you a few things if you want right now." Ava's face broke into a radiant beam. Zoe glanced towards the hallway, noting David was still on a conference call. She smiled. "Now it is." They stepped onto the patio where the afternoon sun cast long golden shadows across the tiles. Zoe connected her phone to the speaker, and a soft ballet melody gracefully filled the backyard. She slipped off her sandals, standing barefoot on the warm stone. "First we breathe," she whispered, taking Ava's small hands. One step at a time, arms overhead, a gentle plie, a slow, careful turn. Ava giggled as she wobbled instinctively, catching Zoe's waist for balance. "It's okay," Zoe laughed, her voice light and reassuring. "Even fairies fall." The light caught them perfectly, Ava's dress swirling gently in the breeze, Zoe's hair glowing golden in the sun. There was no audience, only pure, unadulterated joy. Inside the kitchen, David reached for a glass of water, then froze, his attention drawn by the scene outside. Through the window, he watched them dancing. Zoe guided Ava in slow, graceful circles, her form elegant and utterly unforced. She bent to match Ava's height, gently steadying her, laughing alongside her. Neither of them was pretending now. His hand, still clutching the cold glass, brushed against a photo frame on the counter, the one of Lily smiling with baby Ava. He hadn't moved it in over a year. Now he picked it up, then deliberately set it face down. He looked back outside. Zoe had lifted Ava into her arms, twirling her gently, and Ava's laughter rang out clear and bright as a bell. Zoe's face turned towards the light, shone with something profoundly real. Not duty, not performance, but genuine love. David couldn't pinpoint the exact moment it happened, but something profound shifted within him. She was no longer simply the woman he had hired. She was undeniably something more. That evening, after Ava had fallen asleep, her small arms still softly curved in a dancer's pose, David found Zoe at the dining table, quietly sipping tea. Her hair was neatly pulled back, and her cheeks still carried a gentle flush from the day's sun. "I saw you too," he said, his voice hushed. Zoe slowly set her cup down. "She asked me to," Zoe explained. "I know. I used to avoid ballet," David admitted, his gaze distant. "It always reminded me of Lily, and it hurt. But today it didn't." Zoe looked at him, her expression softening with understanding. "You're good with her," David continued, a warmth entering his voice. "She listens to you. She lights up when you're around." "She's special," Zoe replied, her voice careful and soft. David hesitated for a moment, then cleared his throat. "I was thinking it might be easier for all of us if you stayed a little longer." Zoe's eyebrows lifted slightly in surprise. "You said you're between jobs, and Ava's clearly very attached. My schedule is chaotic. I could really use someone I trust." Zoe tilted her head slightly. "You trust me?" "I do now," he affirmed sincerely. "And it would help with appearances. Some of our partners from the gala are visiting. They're expecting to see a family." She looked down at her cup, considering his words carefully. "So I'd be the nanny, or the fake girlfriend, or both?" She asked, her tone unreadable. David's voice softened genuinely. "Whatever you're comfortable with. You'd be paid well, and you'd have a home for now." Zoe considered this for a long moment, her gaze drifting towards the hallway where Ava slept peacefully, a faint, lingering melody still humming from her room. Then she looked back at David, his face open, vulnerable and sincere. "Okay," she said quietly, a quiet resolve in her voice. "I'll stay." David nodded once, a subtle relief washing over his features. They didn't speak again, but in the ensuing quiet, something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't a contract nor merely a role. It was something simpler, yet infinitely more real. It was a rainy afternoon, the kind that made the entire house feel smaller, wrapped in a quiet stillness. Ava was napping after a morning filled with play and peanut butter sandwiches, and David was ensconced in his office deep in back-to-back meetings. Zoe used this rare tranquility to organize the hallway closet, a task Maria had casually mentioned needed attention. She hummed softly to herself as she sorted through bins containing old coats, holiday decorations, and baby items long since outgrown. Reaching for the top shelf, she pulled down a dusty, unopened box marked Ava 6 months. The cardboard felt soft with age, its corner slightly bent. Zoe hesitated for a moment, then carefully opened it. Inside she found tiny baby clothes, frilly dresses, knitted hats, and a rattle with Ava's name delicately engraved in soft silver. Zoe smiled, her fingers brushing the soft blue blanket folded neatly on top. But beneath it all, wrapped in tissue paper, lay something else. She carefully peeled back the layers and gasped softly. It was a pair of miniature ballet slippers, pale pink, with tips subtly worn as if they had been placed on Ava's tiny feet once or twice. A gift, perhaps, from Lily. A silent hope, a cherished dream. Zoe's hand trembled as she lifted them. The satin was soft, the ribbons long and untied, and something deep within her chest cracked open without warning. Tears unexpectedly spilled onto her cheeks as she clutched the tiny shoes to her chest. She slid down to the floor, her back against the wall, her arms wrapped tightly around the slippers as if they were the last fragile thread connecting her to the life she had once envisioned. She cried not with quiet grace, but with a raw, visceral grief that emanated from the deepest parts of her soul where broken dreams still resided. She wept for the girl she had been, for the stage that had once been her entire world, for the future that had vanished in a single catastrophic fall. She wept for the pure beauty of a child who still believed in fairies and pirouettes, and perhaps just a little for the profound realization that in this home, a home filled with memories that were not her own, she had against all odds begun to feel like she truly belonged. Footsteps approached, breaking her solitude. She tried to quickly wipe her face to conceal the evidence of her tears, but they relentlessly kept coming. David stepped into the doorway. He didn't speak a word. He simply absorbed the sight of her crumpled on the floor, clutching his daughter's first ballet shoes, her shoulders shaking with profound grief. She didn't offer any verbal explanation. He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't attempt to fix it. Instead, he disappeared for a brief moment, then returned and knelt silently beside her. Without a word, he placed a small box of tissues next to her, close enough that she wouldn't have to ask yet, far enough that it didn't feel intrusive. He didn't say, "I'm sorry." He didn't say, "I understand." He said nothing at all. Zoe looked up at him through blurred eyes, and in that profound silence, something unspoken passed between them, a quiet understanding, a moment of raw human truth. David then sat down on the floor beside her, his back against the opposite wall. He didn't look at her, he simply stared at the tiny shoes clutched in her hands, then at the floor. They remained like that for several minutes, without words, without movement. Just two people side by side, mourning different lives but sharing the same heavy air. Eventually, Zoe's tears began to subside. She wiped her eyes, sniffled, and glanced over at David. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He nodded, still saying nothing. And yet somehow he had conveyed everything. In that moment, Zoe knew. He had stopped seeing her as merely a role to be played and had begun to see her for who she truly was, not perfect, not unbroken, but undeniably real. And, perhaps for both of them, that was more than enough. The house was uncharacteristically still for a weekday afternoon. Rain tapped gently against the windows, providing the only sound apart from the faint hum of David's voice echoing from his office upstairs. Zoe and Ava were in the living room, surrounded by scattered coloring books and crayons rolling under the coffee table. Ava, in her favorite polka dot socks, bounced with boundless energy from one end of the room to the other, giggling as she chased a toy bunny. "I'm going to show Daddy my jump," Ava declared, suddenly running towards the hallway that led to the staircase. Zoe barely had time to react. "Ava, wait! Don't run with—" Before she could finish, Ava slipped. A loud thump followed by a terrifying silence. Zoe's heart seized in her chest. Ava. She was already at the stairs before her mind could fully process what had happened. Ava lay crumpled at the bottom step, whimpering in pain, her tiny hands clutching her knee. Zoe dropped to her knees beside her, panic flooding her chest. "Oh my God, Ava, baby, are you okay? Look at me, look at me. Don't move." Tears streamed down the child's face, and Zoe gently gathered her into her arms, her own breath coming in shallow bursts. There was blood, just a scrape, but it looked like so much more on that tiny leg. "I'm taking you to the hospital," Zoe whispered, her voice trembling with urgency. "You're going to be okay, sweetheart. I promise." She grabbed her keys, wrapped Ava in a soft blanket, and rushed out the door without even pausing to call David. At the hospital, the waiting room felt vast and cavernous. White lights, cold air, the ceaseless beeping of monitors, and hushed whispered voices. Zoe sat with Ava curled in her lap, desperately trying to stay calm, kissing her forehead again and again. "It's just a scratch," the nurse had said kindly, trying to reassure them. "We'll do a quick x-ray, just to be sure, but she's okay. She's very brave." Zoe nodded, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. When David finally arrived, the doors to the children's wing swung open with a desperate force. His eyes were wild, searching, and he spotted them instantly. "Zoe!" He rushed towards her. "What happened?" She stood quickly still, cradling Ava protectively in her arms, her voice cracking with raw emotion. "She fell. The stairs. I didn't see her until she was all ready." David looked down at Ava, who was still pale but drowsy from the nurse's gentle reassurances and a small cup of apple juice. Zoe tried to speak again, but her throat closed up entirely. "I was so scared," she whispered, her voice breaking. "She's not even mine, but I—" Her voice fractured completely. "I thought I lost her." The tears came fast and freely this time, with no time or desire to hide them. She looked away, embarrassed and ashamed of falling apart in front of him. But David didn't hesitate. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around both of them, Ava still held tightly in Zoe's embrace. Zoe stiffened for a moment, then utterly collapsed into him, pressing her face into his chest, her shoulders shaking uncontrollably. David said nothing. He simply held them. He held them as if it were the most natural and essential thing in the world. Ava stirred slightly in Zoe's arms and murmured, "Mommy Z." The nickname sliced through David like a whisper of undeniable truth. He tightened his embrace. "She's okay," he said softly, his voice a balm. "You both are." The moment hung in the sterile hospital air, impossibly intimate. No promises, no explanations, just profound connection. Zoe finally pulled back slightly, wiping her tears with the edge of her sleeve. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice strained. "I should have been—" "No," David interrupted gently, his voice firm yet kind. "You were exactly who she needed." He looked into her eyes, truly looking, and something deep within him shifted. Her fear had not been performative. Her tears had not been polite. Her love, however unspoken, had been intensely real, more real than anything he had felt in years. Back at home, hours later, Ava finally fell asleep curled between them on the living room couch. Zoe softly stroked the child's hair, while David sat silently beside them. He reached out and gently took Zoe's hand. This time she didn't pull away, and neither of them had to say a single word. The morning air was thick and heavy, humid and gray, as if the very world anticipated an impending rupture. David was in his office sifting through contracts when his phone buzzed with a message from a longtime associate. It was a quick note, nothing formal. "Thought you should know, Zoe's done this before a lot. Check the dating for hire forums. She's got a profile. She's been playing girlfriend for years. You're not the first." Attached was a screenshot Zoe's old online ad, a grainy photo of her, smiling in a red dress, listing her services as an event date, business dinner companion, discreet and professional. David stared at it for a long, agonizing time. He closed the message without replying. His chest felt tight, constricted, but he desperately didn't want to believe it. He tried to rationalize, telling himself it was in the past, that people did what they must to survive. But the insidious seed of doubt had been planted. That evening, when Zoe descended the stairs in a soft cardigan, her hair still damp from her shower, she found David in the kitchen, stiff and unyielding as stone. He offered no greeting, no smile. Instead, he asked quietly, his voice dangerously low, "Is there anything you want to tell me?" Zoe paused, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. "About what?" He turned the phone towards her, displaying the damning screenshot. "About this." The color drained from her face entirely. She exhaled slowly, a long, weary sigh, then nodded. "Yes, I was going to tell you. I used to do that. Not anymore." David's jaw tensed visibly. "How many?" He pressed his voice sharp. She flinched, stung by his question. "Does it matter?" "Yes," he shot back almost too quickly. "Because I need to know if any of this, if you with Ava, if all of that was just another performance." Zoe took a step back, profound hurt flashing across her face. "You think I could fake that kind of love?" David offered. No answer, his silence hitting harder than any words. Zoe blinked rapidly, fiercely, trying to hold herself together. "I never lied about what I used to do. I did what I had to do to pay rent to eat. But with her with you, it stopped being pretend a long time ago." David swallowed hard, his gaze fixed on the floor. I don't know what to believe anymore," he confessed, his voice laced with a finality that closed something vital inside her. She nodded slowly, then turned and walked away without another word. Outside, the rain had begun to fall, slow, deliberate drops tapping rhythmically on the windows like insistent fingers. By the time she stepped into the street, it had transformed into a relentless downpour. Zoe didn't run. She walked, her thin sweater instantly soaking through her heart, feeling heavier than the storm raging around her. When she reached the corner, she turned back once, just once, to look at the house she had against all odds begun to believe was home. The lights were still on, but no one stood at the door. Later that night, David walked past the guest room. The door was ajar. The bed perfectly made the closet empty. On the nightstand lay a single folded piece of paper. He picked it up with trembling hands and read, "David, I've played roles for years, pretended to be someone I wasn't, smiled when I was breaking inside, held hands with strangers who never knew my name. I was good at it too, good so good that I forgot how it felt to be real. Until Ava. I never expected you to trust me, but I hoped maybe one day I'd be more than the woman you hired. I hoped you saw what I felt and that it wasn't pretend. Yes, I've acted before, but this time I didn't know how to stop. Zoe." David stood in the quiet of the room, the letter shaking slightly in his hands. The rain continued to tap at the windows, a persistent memory refusing to leave. And for the first time in weeks, the house truly felt empty. The sun dipped behind the old brick building, casting golden streaks across the polished wooden floors of the Carter Ballet house. Inside, the cheerful sound of children's laughter mingled with the soft rhythm of slippered feet. At the front of the studio, Zoe gracefully guided a line of children through first position. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her voice remained calm as she offered gentle corrections and heartfelt encouragement. Ava twirled enthusiastically at the front, giggling as she playfully fell into Zoe's waiting arms. "Careful, ballerina," Zoe said, pressing a loving kiss to her head. Just then the front doors opened. Zoe looked up and froze. David stood there holding a small white box. It had been weeks since she had left, weeks without a single word exchanged between them. Ava spotted him first. "Daddy, Mommy Z, Daddy's here." Zoe slowly turned her breath, catching in her throat. David stepped into the studio, his eyes locked firmly on hers. The children, sensing an important moment, quieted instantly, and even the accompanist paused mid-note. He walked to the center of the room, his hands trembling slightly as he opened the small box. Inside lay a tiny pair of white ballet shoes. "They are the first shoes you used to teach Ava," he said, his voice soft. "I kept them." Zoe's eyes filled with tears, but she remained silent, too overwhelmed to speak. David's voice softened further, imbued with profound emotion. "I lost the love of my life once, and I truly believed I'd never have room in me to love again. But I was wrong," he admitted, looking up to meet her gaze. "You didn't take her place. You made a new one. For Ava, for me, for yourself." He exhaled slowly, then asked, his voice full of hope, "Will you dance through life with us? Not just today, not just for Ava, but forever." Zoe covered her mouth, tears freely falling now. She nodded slowly, then more firmly, a resolute yes, unspoken but clear in her eyes. Ava ran into their arms, clapping with delight. The room erupted in cheers. The children didn't fully understand the weight of the moment, but joy needed no translation. A few weeks later, a wedding ceremony was held right there in the studio. There were no grand chandeliers or orchestras, just simple paper lanterns and delicate fairy lights chairs wrapped in soft old fabric, and an abundance of love filling every corner of the air. Zoe wore a simple ivory dress, while Ava in a tutu of her own, joyfully scattered hand-folded petals along the aisle. The guests weren't celebrities or high-profile figures. They were people whose lives had been genuinely touched. A boy Zoe had taught ballet for free. A mother David had quietly helped through a difficult time. A janitor whose daughter now danced because someone had believed in her potential. It wasn't a grand affair, but it was profoundly sacred. When Zoe tried to speak her vows, her voice choked with tears, making her unable to continue. David gently squeezed her hands. "You don't need to say anything," he whispered, his eyes full of love. "I already know." Ava stood proudly between them, a wide, bright smile on her face. It was not a performance, she declared, echoing a profound truth. It was home. A year later, the Carter Ballet House had flourished, growing into the region's largest community dance program. Children lined up weekly, not seeking perfection, but a sense of belonging. Zoe Carter now stood as its esteemed director, no longer an actress playing a role, but a devoted teacher, a loving mother, a woman finally living something truly real. In his late wife's honor, David had launched the Lily Carter Memorial Fund, dedicated to supporting single mothers and pursuing dreams they had once been forced to leave behind. And Ava, now 4 and brimming with spirited energy, had wholeheartedly claimed her own place within the studio. She delightedly tied shoelaces, handed out water bottles, and earnestly reminded everyone to smile as they danced. At the entrance of the studio hung a touching photograph of David, Zoe, and Ava barefoot, on stage, hands clasped together, bowing in unison. Beneath it, a beautiful plaque read, "Here every child can dance, every soul can heal, every love deserves a second chance." The year-end showcase was standing room only, packed with eager attendees. Ava stepped forward for her solo performance in a tiny white dress. Her routine wasn't flawless, but it was pure magic. At the final note, she dashed into Zoe's arms, then reached for David's hand. Together, the three of them walked to the center of the stage and bowed. The room thundered with applause, and no one watching could possibly doubt it. Some families are born, others are built. This one, it was danced into existence. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to join our growing family of listeners who believe in the healing power of love and second chances. At Soul-Stirring Stories, we bring you real, emotional, and unforgettable tales that remind us all what truly matters. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that speak to the soul. And remember, some families are born, others are built, but every heart deserves to be seen, and every story deserves to be told. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a moment that might just change your life.